The Spline and Webflow integration is really a game changer if you want to add a new level of interactivity into your projects. And today we're going to explore that. On the first part of this two-part tutorial, I showed you what is a spline and how to model, texture, and prepare your scene ready to be animated into Webflow. Today, I'm going to show you how the Flowdrinks project was built and how to create these stunning 3D interactions. So let's check it out. Okay, so a quick recap on the Flowdrinks project. So this is the project that I built for this tutorial, and I'm going to show you how this project was built in Webflow. We already discussed how to build the 3D scene, but just for a quick recap, like we have three levels of, well, we have other interactions on this page, but we have three levels of interactions on the spline scene itself, all done in Webflow. None of this is done in Spline. All the objects on Spline are static, so all the animation, all the interactions you see are all built on Webflow using the new integration. So the first one is this mouse movement, so I can move my mouse and I can see this Flowdrinks berry blaze can moving together with my mouse. The second interaction that we have on the spline scene is that when we start scrolling, we see that the whole scene is kind of rotating, so we can see the next scan. So this kind of works as a slider, something like that. Okay. And the third interaction is that each one of the cans, when you start scrolling, they also rotate on their own, I think it's the Z-axis, the Y-axis. I always get confused with the axis, but it's rotating like, doing like a full rotation around itself. You can see I broke these down into three interactions. This could be two interactions, but I like to split interactions to keep things sane, because sometimes when you create interactions in Webflow, like you can have like tons of things on the same keyframe, especially for scroll-based interactions, and it's hard to visualize what's going on. So I usually like to break things down. So let's take a look at the build. So here is the Flowdrinks project on Webflow, and like quick walkthrough on the structure is pretty simple. So we have your main element, the page wrapper, which will hold the whole website, and at the same time holds the scroll interaction. Then I'm going to take a look later. Then we have the header, which only contains the logo and the button. We have the sticky wrapper, where the magic happens, with Lottie background. So I chose to do this background effect using Lottie because we're using like a mask effect. And when we scale things with CSS on browser, sometimes like things like the mask, or if you have a div as a circle and you scale up this div, or you have a huge div and scale it down, it either looks blurry or looks like very pixelated, something like that. It doesn't look good. So I like to use, at least for now, Lottie files for that, because it's a real SVG mask being animated inside an SVG. So it's basically that. So that's why I'm using a Lottie files here for the background. Then we have the inside and element sticky inner, where the content it's living. And by the way, the sticky wrapper obviously is a element with position sticky, right? And yeah, we have the sticky inner element that centralizes everything. We have two elements here, the names wrapper. So we have the 4 names here for the 4 different flavors. We have the list, okay? And then once we start scrolling, we translate this specific element here. And then we have our spline scene, right? And which is a native Webflow element now. If you go to the add interface here, you will see here, new spline scene. You can drag this, drop here, and then you will see this element. And if you go to settings, all you have to do to embed your spline scene into Webflow is basically copy the spline viewer URL and paste here, and that's it. Basically, we go here, export, go to viewer, copy this URL, go back here, paste, and it's done. And you will be able to visualize your 3D scene in real time inside the designer, which is magical, right? If you tried to do that before with Spline Viewer, all you will be doing was using a embed component, embedding the code, but you wouldn't be able to visualize the scene itself. Now you can see it, okay? Then we have section anchors. So we have these links here, which they work as an anchor link. So if we go back to the website, and if you click here, it will scroll to the next one, scroll to the next one, then to the next one. Yeah, so it works as a scroll elements, but we don't have a specific element here that the anchor link can be attached to the way it was built here, because these are no sections. This is just one single section, and things are animated here inside using interactions. So we don't have specific sections here. So we had to create those sections to tell these links like where on the page you need to scroll to, right? So that's why we have 4 empty sections. These are only for spacing and only for controlling the anchor links. So we have all the 4 sections with specific IDs here. And also, if you pay attention to the clonable, you will see that we're using Lenis to create this smooth scroll on the website, right? And because we're using Lenis and because Webflow has its own auto smooth scrolling functionality, and sometimes they clash together, you will notice that these anchor links are not actually pointing to a section. If you're not using Lenis, you can just use paste section and select one of these. But I'm using Lenis, and I know that there's some conflicts here, so I'm basically just leave the link empty, and I use a data attribute that I created. I have another tutorial for Lenis. I'll paste the link here, and you understand what this data attribute means. But it basically uses Lenis to run the scroll interaction itself. Okay, so it works exactly the same way, but it's not an anchor link, standard anchor link functionality. It's using Lenis to do the scrolling, okay? And yeah, so this is the footer with the anchor links list. Then we have our descriptions. We have 4 descriptions here. It's the same principle as the names. We have a list, and we have 4 descriptions. All of them has the same height, same size, 3 lines to make sure that everything's looking good. And we have our button at the bottom, which is a little bit more complex, because if you can see here, as we start scrolling, the link inside the button changes, the name changes, and the can picture also changes. We'll rotate and we'll show a new one. Okay, so the structure here is also interesting. So we have mask, then we have inside the button, then we have 4 links here though. So we're translating this element here inside this white container, which mimics the look of a button, right? And then we have the same thing for the cans. 4 can images. Then we rotate this element, and then we use scaling, and I think it's just scaling or scaling opacity to show and hide which one of these images, okay? That's how this button is done. But let's take a look at interactions. All right, so the main element here that contains interactions, we have small interaction here. I don't think we have, yeah, we do have interaction here and here as well. But the core thing of this clonable is that most of the interactions are based on scrolling. So most of the interactions are obviously attached to the page wrapper that contains all the elements here, right? And you will notice that we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different element triggers. And we have a page trigger, which is the one for mouse movement, okay? So let's break down each one of these interactions one by one. The first one, page scroll. So obviously starting when it's fully visible, because we want to start when the page wrapper is here. So 0% will always start at the top of the page. And then when we click here, we see that a few things are happening on some different keyframes of the timeline. And the thing is, the way I created the section anchors, not all of them has the same height. The first one and the last one has 100% VH, but the ones at the middle, I think they have 200 VH, something like that, to give us a little bit more time to have the zesty Zinfandel and the tropical thrill flavors on the screen as you keep scrolling, right? Which means that the numbers you need to I needed to include here for the keyframes and the changes, they have to be like tested. So it really depends on how your build is organized, but these are the keyframes that I decided that was like the right spot for the interaction itself, right? And okay, and the page scroll is basically the core of the whole thing. So it's basically changing the background and at the same time rotating or spline scene to show the next flavor. So it's basically showing a different flavor, okay? And yeah, well, we have here a Lottie file update that will play the Lottie file from 0% to like almost 1/4 of the Lottie file timeline. Then we stay like that for a while. Then we go to the next main frame on the whole timeline that shows the third flavor. Then we stay there for a while as well. Then we finally go to the next one. But that's Lottie files. It's pretty simple. It's just playing the timeline. Okay. Now the interesting part, the spline interaction. That's what we're waiting for, right? And the interesting thing about spline integration Webflow is that you're not just selecting the scene. You actually have the ability to select an element with spline scene, and then you have the ability to select an object inside the scene, which means that you can have multiple objects and you can use Webflow to animate all these objects individually, which is amazing, right? And for this interaction where we rotate the whole thing, we just need one element, rotate group. So coming back here to our spline scene, we have here the main group here called rotate group that contains all of our, just go back to personal camera. This group contains all of our cans. So we're basically rotating the whole group almost to a full cycle. I think we're going to just do like 3/4 of the cycle. Okay. And by the way, since we're here, I just reorganized and renamed a little bit of the layers and the groups compared to the previous tutorial. So we have here for each one of the cans, we have actually 3 groups. One is the individual can group that we're going to animate. Another one that we're also going to animate for the movement of the can. And then the position, that is basically just position the cans inside the parent group, which is the rotate group. Okay, let's go back to our main camera. And then let's go back here to Webflow. And you can see here that on the spline scene, I have at 0 because we're not rotating yet. And then the next one is, well, if it's a full cycle, 360 degrees. So that will be 90 degrees. No, it's not. Because the way rotation works on Webflow and spline integration is not with degrees, it's with radians, right? So remember that like geometry stuff and pi, 3.14. Yes, we're using that kind of math here. So a full cycle or a 360 degrees rotation on spline with Webflow is not 360 degrees. It's 6.3. That's the max value, or 6.28 if you want to be more precise, because pi, which is like half a cycle, is 3.14, right? So full cycle is 6.28 or 6.3 because that's how they round it here on Webflow. So to make like a quarter of that rotation, we need to split pi by 2, which is 1.57. Okay, so yeah, a little bit of math here. I'm not a huge fan of math, but yes, we need to understand a little bit of math here and geometry to create these interactions on Webflow. Right, and yeah, that's all I'm doing. I'm rotating the z-axis, and if you pay attention here, we have a few things that we can do. That's what we can do with Webflow interactions. It's changing. You select the element, and then you can change the position on the three axes, x, y, and z. You can change rotation on x, y, and z as well, and we can change the scale also on the three axes, x, y, and z. We'll play with this a little bit more on the other interactions. But yeah, if you see here, I can rotate. And I can see the rotation happening in real time, which is amazing. You can see your scene being rotated, and you can play with interactions until you find the right numbers straight into Webflow. So let's go back to 157. And okay, the next one, we stay on 157, then we do half a cycle, which is pi 3.14. We stay at, here, then we stay at 2.14 for a little while, and then the final rotation, it's 3/4, which is 4.71. Okay, so we made 3/4. If we had a full cycle, we will be back to the berry blaze flavor, which is the first one. Okay, so that's how we rotate the 3D scene with Webflow interactions. And now let's just play here so we can reset. And now let's take a look at the second one, the cans rotation. And what this does is rotating the cans as you scroll. So if I preview this animation, if I start scrolling, you see that the can is doing like a full cycle on its own axis. Okay, so that's what's going to happen for each one of the cans. And again, we have the same times here on the timeline for the whole scroll interaction. But this time we only have spline elements. And if we click here, you will see that we're selecting the berry blaze group. We're selecting the Zesties Infernal group. And what we're doing here is that the next can, it's rotated, like has a full cycle in reverse. Then when you start scrolling, it will rotate back to the default position. And then after we move away from that, you can see Zesties Infernal here is at 0. When we move that to the next flavor, that can will rotate from the default position 0 to full cycle, but on the opposite position. So it starts on reverse, rotates around itself, goes to the default position, and then it does another full rotation when we go out of the screen. Okay, and we have that for each one of the cans. So we start with Berry Blaze, then Berry Blaze does a full rotation because this is going to move away from the screen. We have the Zesties Infernal flavor. Then the next one is the Tropical Thrill. And then finally, the last one is the Citrus Crush. Okay, so we have rotations, individual rotations for each one of these cans, and it's rotating on the y-axis. So you can see here that we can rotate here. We can see how all of these properties can do in real time. So I'm moving here on the z-axis, on the y, on the x. So this is really fun to play with. I can like spend lots of time doing this. So this is scaling. If I can scale my object and make it look really weird, but yeah, it can do all of these things, right? So let's reset all of that. So that's the individual rotation. So we have two different interactions. So one is just for changing the flavor. The second one is just to rotating the cans. And then the third one, that affects the spline scene, it's not these other interactions. It's the mouse movement interaction. This one is attached to the viewport because we want this mouse movement interaction to happen like globally, no matter which element is the one that you're overing at that specific moment. We want that interaction to happen all the time. So we have this interaction named can's mouse move, and here we have the X movement and the Y movement. So X and Y, right? And here we are selecting each one of the cans, but it's not a can. Remember that we have different groups for different types of movements. The individual can is what we're doing the full cycle, and the citrus crush movement, go through movement, zest is infinite movement, berry blaze movement. The second group is the group that we use to do the translations. So since we have multiple types of animations and interactions, that's why we have multiple layers of groups. It's the same principle of doing things on Webflow as well. Have different interactions and like translation, scaling, etc. that need to behave differently. Then you need to break them down. That's what we're doing here with the groups and breaking down the interactions as well. Okay, so here it's pretty simple. We select all the groups with the movement suffix at the end of the name, and then we on the X action we move them a little bit. So I just play with the angles to make it look similar to what you see on the scene here. So the numbers that we use to position the cans on the scene, the numbers we're using here, they're kind of like just for visualization purposes. And the numbers that you can see here are slightly different, but they work well. So that's what I have here. So for example, the berry blaze movement group starts with minus 0.5 on the Z axis, and then it goes to minus 0.3. Okay, so you can see here the difference. So it's just rotating like this. Then on the Y, we have like 0.4 on the axis actually, but it's x-axis on the spline scene, not on Webflow. On Webflow, the movement on the mouse is on the Y axis, okay? And so we go to 0.4 to minus 0.4. So these are all numbers that I tested here, and it ended up creating this type of animation here. So yeah, so that's the interactions on the spline scene. So we have 3 different interactions, 1 mouse movement and 2 scroll-based interactions, all broken down into multiple groups to make sure that we have everything properly organized and animated, and nothing is affecting each other in a wrong way. So everything's working perfectly. And that's all required to create this interaction on Webflow. If I play here, click on preview, I can see everything that I did in real time. I don't have to publish this and go to the link to see. I can see my interactions working together in real time here in Webflow. This is the magic of the Spline and Webflow integration. As an extra, we have a few more interactions here. I'm going to show those interactions. One is the names scroll. So the names that we have here in the background, and also the descriptions that we have here. When we start scrolling, they also need to scroll, but they are inside a sticky element, so they can't scroll exactly with the page. So we have the sticky wrapper, and then we have the names list element. You can see here that's the element that we're selecting, and then once we start scrolling, again using the same numbers on the timeline, we translate that names list element. That's what it's translating to show the next one. Then we stop a little bit, and we'll translate again and again. So we do that. We do the same thing with the descriptions list, which is basically a list, horizontal, vertical list of descriptions. They are also okay, preview. It's also moving. You can see right here, and again, and again. And you notice that also the colors of the buttons, the text here, and also the color of the text in the background. It's all changing. And I'm doing this by using another new feature of Webflow, the CSS variables, which basically allows me to use like one color, one CSS variable for colors, apply this like anywhere I want, doesn't matter which class is or object or whatever. I can just apply that CSS variable and I can animate the CSS variable and not the classes itself, which is really cool. So I have this, which is a color variable called button color, and I'm animating the color to from the blue to the red, and then from the red to the other shade of, it's a grayish blue, and then from this shade to the green for the background for the text. And I also have a button, a theme color, which starts as white, then goes to the shade of blue here, and then it goes to the green. So that's how I'm changing colors as we scroll. So if I scroll here back, you can see that it changes from green to, from this blue to white, and it also happens on the buttons and on the links and etc. So all controlled by CSS variables, which is pretty cool. Anchor link scroll, again, because we're not using the native Webflow anchor links feature. If we were using that, we wouldn't need that this interaction, because Webflow has a native selector for currently selected, or the anchor links that are on their specific positions. So here I'm basically just changing opacity between each one of the links here to mimic that same behavior. So if you can see here, I start scrolling, and the active section gets more opacity and the other ones are more transparent. Okay, so that's all that this interaction does. And then the button scrolling, which is basically just an interaction to change things here inside this button. So the translating this group here to change the current link, it's one thing. Also rotating and scaling the images of the cans inside the button, and that's it. So these are all the interactions, mostly all of them. I think this button also have an interaction as well, and these two, but these are the main interactions on this this clonable. And that's it. That's how you create a Webflow website, add a Spline scene, and use the Webflow and Spline integration to create these amazing interactions that we can see here on the Flowdrinks project. So a quick recap here, and it's very simple, just a couple things to keep in mind. Well, the first thing is that the integration between Spline and Webflow allows you to do a lot of stuff, but not everything. Like on Spline itself, you can have tons of different kinds of events. You can have click events, you can have like logic, you have like variables, tons of things you can explore inside Spline itself. But when it comes down to using Webflow to animate a Spline scene, there are some limitations for now. I don't know the future, but for now, what you can do is select specific elements and use position, rotation, and scale on which one of these elements. And you can do a lot of stuff with just these things. Trust me. The next one is that, well, you only have these things available on the native Webflow integration, but you can mix things together. I haven't done this on this clonable, but you can create an animation on an object on Spline scene and use the same scene and animate different things on that scene. For example, you can animate a camera using Webflow interactions, but have like a object playing an animation itself and do that animation inside Spline itself. And the third one is just basically always keep in mind that depending on how you plan your interactions, it's always better to break down your interaction into multiple ones. Like don't stuff like tons of things on one single scroll based interaction. You can break it down and group things that make sense. The same way that I group things like the can rotation on its own axis, or rotating the whole group to show the next flavor, and then the mouse movement, moving the can on different angles, etc. Okay, and that's it. Thanks for watching. I hope this tutorial was useful for you. Now you have the power of 3D on your hands with Spline and Webflow integration. So yes, go ahead, go crazy, create fun stuff, have fun, just like I had with this Flowdrinks project. And yeah, show me what you're creating. And also make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because I'm planning more Spline tutorials in the future. Okay, so that's it. Thanks.